welcome, welcome, welcome to the last Thursday. We are a smaller group today, which actually we don't mind. So thank you very much for coming out to this very, very fascinating presentation. I know you all know Gerard. We know him and we love him. He's been with us for many, many years, and he does an amazing job with the children, with a summer camp that I can tell you is one of the most popular summer camps every year, and there's a reason for that.
For those of you that don't know, my name is Ramya, the Director of Environmental Science for the Key Biscayne Community Foundation. Today, Gerard is going to be talking to you guys about what a marine biologist might order in a seafood restaurant. I'm a marine biologist myself, and I don't eat seafood for a number of reasons. He'll talk about some of them. But, you know, there's a lot of different types of seafood that are perfectly safe and sustainable and, you know, whatever. He'll get into the details with that. I'm not going to go into it. As you said, you all know Gerard, and he's the director of the marine biology camp for the kids that they bring out here to the Key. See the turtle nests evaluated and learn all about marine biology for, you know, especially for those kids that want to be future marine biologists. It's a really great opportunity that he has for them. So with that, I will hand it over to him. Thank you.
I'm a marine biologist, but you know, there's different kinds of marine biologists. I mean, if you need a liver transplant, your next door neighbor is a brain surgeon. You're not going to go to him and say, can you help me out with the liver thing? He's going to say, but I'm a brain doctor. You need a liver doctor. You're not going to say, but you're a doctor, aren't you? Well, marine biologists are the same. I mean, there's turtle experts, there's whale experts, there's shrimp. I'm a fish guy. I'm an ichthyologist, okay? And you're saying, but wait a minute. Didn't Channel 6 interview you a few weeks ago about the killer whales off of Key Largo? Yeah, they think I'm a whale expert. But that's because I taught general oceanography for many years. In addition to teaching marine biology at the college level, I taught oceanography. And in oceanography, first of all, you know, since it was for non-majors, I like to call it oceanography you can use. Like, you know, because a lot of people, they take a class in college for science that they're forced to take. Am I ever going to use this again? You know? And so I used to call it, you know, practical oceanography. Like, what should you eat in a seafood restaurant? You know, what happens if you fall off a cruise ship and you don't get rescued right away? You know, that's happened. You can survive. If you don't hit the propeller, you don't hit the side of the ship, you can be picked up the next day, and it's happened several times. So we talk about that. We talk about, you know, what do you do if you see a shark? You know, what's going to happen? You get stung by a jellyfish. And I don't have to worry anymore about people saying, well, will I ever use this again? Because years ago, one of the Miami Dolphin football players took my class. He already had his degree. He was just taking it because he wanted to improve his fishing. He would come after class, ask me questions. And we talked about how the Gulf Stream is, you know, it's a warm water current. If you fall off a cruise ship, you're not going to be in cold water. We talked about how fast it moves. If you're in your boat and your boat breaks down off of Miami, you don't get it started right away, you'll be in West Palm Beach before you know it. We talk about all that. And we talk about what happens if you see a jellyfish. Well, a few years after he took my class, he's out fishing by himself off of Miami, I believe it was, and he fell off his boat with no life jacket. And the engine was still running. And the engine was going 5 miles an hour. He couldn't catch up to the boat. So now he's out there by himself in the middle of the night, right? And so he begins to try to swim to shore, okay? He made it. He got to West Palm Beach. He climbed up on the beach, shivering, knocked on the door because he'd been out there all night. And the police came and the paramedics came, took him to the hospital. I heard some people say that they didn't think the story was true. Oh, it's very true. The paramedics could tell he'd been out there all night, okay? So one student at the University of Miami Marine Lab was hearing it because he kind of said that he wasn't sure that this might have happened. I said, it definitely happened. And I said, actually, he took my oceanography class. And we talked about what could happen if you were to fall off a cruise ship, for example. Well, the guy sort of implied that I might have saved his life, and I didn't save his life. What saved his life was he's a great swimmer. He was an athlete who was still in great shape. He was determined to get back to see his kids again, okay? That's what saved his life. But while he's out there floating in the ocean or swimming, if maybe he saw a shark, or maybe he's worried about getting too cold, if he just took one piece of information that he learned in my oceanography class, that's a good thing. If just one piece of information came in handy while he was out there, that's a good thing. And one of the things we talk about is, what do you order in a seafood restaurant? You know, some of you here, the reason I'm here today is because, you know, leaving my camp the other day, somebody said, what are the kids talking about? Puffers. Should we eat puffers? No, you don't want to eat puffers. And so I started telling her about the puffers, and so she said, you should give a talk one time at one of our luncheons about that. Okay, we'll do that. As a matter of fact, a couple weeks ago, I did a camp in the Keys, and we had the parents all around as I was talking about the fish, and one dad yelled out, do you eat fish? And I said, yeah, I had fish last night. That's not the question you want to ask a marine biologist. The question is, what fish don't you eat? That's the question you want to ask. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to address that, and then talk about some other issues, not just fish, but we'll talk about other things that people might order in a seafood restaurant. The thing to do is, I'm not going to tell you not to eat some, well, I'm going to tell you two things not to eat. And the other things I'm going to say is you probably shouldn't eat too much of it. Like, don't eat so much of that. You know, that's kind of, there's books on dangerous marine animals that are like that thick, and they have whole sections on fish you should avoid. And there's very few fish where they tell you don't eat it. Well, let's start with swordfish, okay? That's a fish I don't eat. And that's because of mercury. And mercury, you know, there's a process called biomagnification where fish that eat other fish, you know, over time, you get an accumulation of toxins that could be, mercury, for example, can build up in the food chain. So the big fish at the top of the food chain could have dangerous levels of mercury. And swordfish, for some reason, seem to be pretty high on that list, okay? So what I tell people is if you like swordfish, just don't eat so much of it, okay? They did a study, actually, a local television station several years ago did a study where they actually tested different cans of tuna. What about tuna? Tuna are big fish. Yeah, they are. And you say, I eat tuna. So do I. But you see, the thing is that what kind of tuna you eat will probably be something you want to think about in the future, because albacore are big tuna. And albacore are actually caught with a method different than purse seining. Now, many of you years ago stopped eating tuna, or you switched to albacore perhaps, because you heard that dolphin mammals were getting trapped in purse seines. It's a type of net. And you heard that albacore don't get caught in those nets because they're too big, and they use a different fishing method. That's true. So some of you switched to albacore years ago when you heard that, right? But here's the thing, when they started testing cans of tuna, what they found were mercury levels in cans of albacore were much higher than in chunk light. With chunk light comes from smaller types of tuna, right? Smaller species. So I prefer to eat chunk light, right? I'm not telling you not to eat albacore or swordfish, just don't eat too much of it, right? Years ago, the government sent out a warning to asking people who had certain conditions, if you had this liver situation, or if you were pregnant, or they, you know, if they're telling pregnant women and people with liver not to eat certain kind of fish, I don't want to eat that fish either, you know? But they were actually telling these specific groups should avoid eating these fish that could have high levels of mercury. Now, years ago, I'm down in the Keys, and my daughter was a Girl Scout. We stopped at a seafood restaurant on the way back from the Dry Tortugas. And of course, you know, I'm going to order food, and everyone's thinking, what's he going to order? You know? So I ordered mahi, okay? And the guy next to me, and I don't tell people, when I go to a social event, I'm not going to tell people what to eat, not to eat. So they bring me my mahi, and they bring the guy the swordfish, right? And as he's eating the swordfish, he says to me, is there a reason you chose to order mahi instead of swordfish? That's a loaded question. And I go, yes, there is. And I began to tell him about mercury and biomagnification while he's eating his swordfish. So when he finished the swordfish, he said to me, why didn't you tell me this before I eat the swordfish? I said, because you're never going to order swordfish again. And I wanted to have one good swordfish for the road. You know, because he's not going to order it. And again, I'm not telling you not to eat it, just don't eat it so much, because they found, and we'll take questions, but they found that in this particular study, the way they knew people had a mercury problem is people were going to the doctor with similar conditions, like they were losing their hair, and when they tested them, they had high levels of mercury. And what almost all those people had in common was they were eating a lot of big fish at the top of the food chain, okay? So you want to select the fish, and there we go to, how many of you know you should not eat a barracuda? Raise your hand if you ever heard that. That is true, okay? Now you say, well, it's okay to eat small ones. Not me, because there's something called ciguatera poisoning. Ciguatera poisoning is extremely rare, super rare, okay? If you live on a little island in the South Pacific where everyone in your village eats fish every day, maybe one day in your lifetime, someone in that village will get ciguatera poisoning. That's how rare it is. I actually met a kid who had ciguatera. And, you know, she was 8 years old in my camp. She says to me, I had ciguatera poisoning. What 8-year-olds know what ciguatera is? And I go, what fish did you eat? She said, amberjack. Yeah, that would be probably number 2 on the list after Barracuda, okay? But Ciguatera can be found in any predatory reef fish, okay? Barracudas, for some reason, seem to get it the most, right? But it can be in any predatory reef fish. It's almost never fatal, but the symptoms can last 25 years. It's very, very rare. I wouldn't stop eating fish because of it, but if you want to be extra careful, you can do what I do. When I go into a seafood restaurant, see, what you want to do is avoid like really big groupers, big barracudas, you know? When I go into a seafood restaurant and I order a seafood platter, sometimes I'll ask, what's the fish in the platter? And if they tell me it's grouper, I'll say, can you switch that with mahi-mahi? The main reason I do that is I prefer the taste of mahi-mahi. The other reason is I don't know what size grouper they got back there in that kitchen they're cutting those fillets off of. And with my luck, they got the world's record grouper back there. So I'll go ahead and switch it to mahi-mahi just to be safe. The other thing you can do is if you go fishing and you catch a bunch of groupers, don't eat the biggest one. That's the one that's most likely to have it, okay? People say, well, it's okay to eat small barracudas because they haven't had enough time to accumulate the toxin. Yeah, but barracudas seem to be number 1 on the list for Ciguatera poisoning. So I wouldn't eat any barracuda. Well, years ago, I was doing a survey for the National Marine Fisheries Service, and I was at a dock, and one of the surveyors was interviewing, and I saw some guy caught a really big barracuda. And some little kid, probably 10 years old, went up to the guy and goes, you shouldn't eat that, because you could tell he was going to keep it. I was so impressed that this kid knew that. And so I said to him, very good. I said, you know why you shouldn't eat a big barracuda? Yeah, it's not a good idea. And I go, well, yeah, but do you know the real reason? Yeah, because you're not supposed to. Well, he didn't know what Ciguatera was, but that's the reason. So I would avoid any large predatory reef fish. You're saying, well, wait a minute. You said you'd switch mahi-mahi. How do you know how big the mahi-mahi in the kitchen that they were cutting? I don't have to know. Mahi-mahi aren't reef fish, okay? Remember, Ciguatera occurs in predatory reef fish, right? Now, science is full of exceptions, right? So you hear me, oh, sharks never get cancer. I think they found 2 that had cancer. And you say, well, mahi-mahi never gets Ciguatera poisoning. Well, I think there's been 2 cases. And to tell you how little we know about Ciguatera, most doctors have never seen a case of it. It's that rare. When I first started learning marine biology 157 years ago, what they told me caused Ciguatera, we now know it's caused by a dinoflagellate, a single-cell creature, and the toxin accumulates up the food chain. So, you know, we're learning more about it all the time. It's something that years ago I started teaching high school marine biology to pay my way through college, and one of my students wrote a paper on Ciguatera poisoning. This is back in the 80s, okay? I remember thinking this could be published because her parents were both physicians, and she used their medical library or whatever, and we knew so little about Ciguatera poisoning, especially back then. Most doctors have never seen a case of it, and most doctors wouldn't recognize it because most people, the symptoms are pretty much neurological. Tingling, numbness, so most doctors, if you don't tell the doctor, oh, I had a big grouper for dinner last night, they might not make the connection, okay? Many Ciguatera cases were misdiagnosed as multiple sclerosis because nobody mentioned eating the fish, and the symptoms tend to be neurological. The most famous symptom of Ciguatera is reversal of hot and cold. So if you ever eat a really big grouper and things that are hot feel cold, things that are cold feel hot, stay away. You know, don't eat any more and go get yourself tested for Ciguatera poisoning because that's the most famous symptom. Now going back to the puffers, you had asked me about the puffers, that's why I'm here today. Plus the dad who said to me, what fish don't you eat? Okay, that's why I'm here. So you never want to eat puffers. I mean, there's something called tetrodotoxin, okay? Tetrodotoxin, puffers are blowfish, okay? They're fish that blow up. So tetrodotoxin is very deadly, all right? I'm talking 60% of people who get it die. 60%. I mean, you know, COVID was like less than 2% in the United States. 60% of people that eat puffers and get tetrodotoxin die. Very high percentage. Well, why would anybody eat that? Ask the people in Japan that eat it all the time. There's about 100 people in Japan every year that die from eating puffers. And that's despite the fact that the guy in the kitchen in Japan has to be specially licensed to prepare the puffer. He has to take a special course because the toxin is not always in the same organs. So he has to know how to cut the puffer properly to not contaminate the flesh. Despite that, about 100 people die every year in Japan from eating puffers. As a matter of fact, years ago, I wear a lot of hats. I'm also a soccer coach. Years ago, I coached a kid in soccer whose father was a professional baseball player. And he went to play baseball in Japan at the end of his career. And he wrote a book about it when he came back. And one of the things in his book was he was amazed at how many people will eat puffer even though you could die. And so the question comes up, well, what about our local species? There's like 4 common puffers around Key Biscayne. Do they have the toxin? Yes. So he says, so how come we never hear of anybody having a problem? Because we don't eat puffers here, okay? But in Japan, it's considered a delicacy. So here's my advice to you, next time you're in Japan and you go to a conference, you're at a conference and they come out with the trays of puffer and they say, don't worry, the guy in the kitchen, if I need an oil change, I'm going to go to a licensed mechanic to change the oil in my car. But what if he has a bad day and puts the wrong oil in my car? What's going to happen? My car's not going to run so good, I guess. But what if I go to Japan and I eat a puffer and the guy in the kitchen had a bad day? I could die, So next time you go to Japan and the guy, they come out and they go, well, here we got this puffer, but don't worry because the guy in the kitchen, just say, I'll take a cheeseburger, right? I mean, don't take a chance. I don't care how good it tastes, 80%, 60%, that's really, really super high. So then we get to the issue of filter feeders, right? She and I talked about it. So I try to avoid filter feeders because who knows what they're filtering, right? So like oysters and clams and all that kind of stuff, I try to avoid filter feeders. Now, here's the thing. People eat oysters all the time. My advice to you is if you like bivalves, that's what they're called, make sure you stick with major seafood restaurant chains, okay? Because I actually had one of my college students who worked in one of those restaurants. And she said, we guarantee people that they won't get sick because it's also a dinoflagellate. It's a single-celled creature that has a toxin. And the toxin, they can build up a toxin in the tissues. You can't cook it out. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. But if it has it, you're going to get sick. So she said that, I forget which restaurant chain it was, but she says, we guarantee that people won't get sick from that. And the reason they guarantee that is because they get their oysters from places where they check the water regularly. They check the water in the bay for dinoflagellate levels, okay? Here's where you get in trouble. When you go on vacation and you're at some remote island in the middle of nowhere and someone comes out of the ocean on a paddleboard with fresh oysters and you say, can't get any fresher seafood than that. That's true, but who knows where he got those oysters from? And chances are he didn't take a dinoflagellate test kit out there with him. That's where people get sick. Eating shellfish on a beach in the middle of nowhere. I saw this happen when I was a kid in Acapulco, right? So you stick with the major seafood restaurant chains. You say, what about those people years ago I heard that they ate oysters and some of them died? Well, that had nothing to do with dinoflagellates. That was a bacterial contamination issue, okay? You can get food poisoning from almost anything, okay? That had nothing to do with dinoflagellate, and the people who died had a pre-existing medical condition, so there's a lot of factors involved there. Stick to the major seafood restaurant chains. If you're concerned about bacterial contamination, don't watch Channel 10's Dirty Dining and see what they see when they go back in the kitchens. I always get upset when they go to a restaurant I go to all the time. No, don't show me what's back there. I don't want to see it, right? But yeah, you can get that from pretty much anything. But when it comes to seafood, if you're going to eat oysters or any other kind of bivalves, I would stick to the major seafood restaurants. Years ago, there was a big warehouse in Louisiana where government officials came in and would not let those oysters go out to the restaurants. And the fishermen got mad and said, well, you never tested the oysters. You didn't know if there was any toxin, paralytic shellfish poison. You didn't know if there was any toxin in the oyster. We don't have to, they said. We tested the water where they got the oysters from. And we found the dinoflagellate levels were too high. So we're not going to let them go out. And so, again, I'm not telling you not to eat this stuff. Some of us don't eat filter feeders, right? But you can eat filter feeders. And if you're going to eat swordfish, just don't eat so much of it. I would definitely avoid a barracuda. Oh no, they're bringing barracuda. Oh no, I've been assured that the food that's being served here today is not swordfish or barracuda. But it's not even seafood, I was just told. There you go. So you're good. You're all good to go. But anyway, so again, I'm not a toxicology guy. It's called ichthyosarcotoxism, by the way, is the study of or the science of fish toxins. That's not my specialty. But the thing is, when you teach oceanography for a long time, I used to have students, they would write papers. And so a lot of times when I'm reading their papers, I would read things about certain area and thinking, wow, and I have to research that. Is that true? You know, I mean, I had papers on pretty much every subject, which is probably why I was able to talk to Channel 6 a few weeks ago about the killer whales off Key Largo. By the way, I ended up on Telemundo. I don't even speak Spanish. How did they do that? All of a sudden, my quotes were in Spanish. Like, it's amazing, you know.
Marine biologist Gerard Loisel weighed in on just how unique this encounter was.
It's not like it never happens, but it's rare, especially, you know, down this far. They prefer colder water, so it's unusual for them to occur this far south, but it's happened before.
Oh, he's coming right at you! The big boy!
No doubt these guys knew they found something awesome.
Like 7 feet, and one of them was like more than half the length of the boat and as big around as the boat. So it was definitely intimidating.
An extraordinary morning Mike and his friends won't soon forget.
But anyway, but again, a lot of it is because I have that general knowledge of oceanography, and that's where, you know, again, a lot of my feelings about seafood and so forth, the things I've read. I actually had a very good professor who taught a course with a lot of stuff about that in there, so I remember a lot of what he taught me too. What I'd like to do, did you all enjoy that little presentation, by the way?
Yes.
What I'd like to do is to stick around and answer questions. And while you're eating, you can ask me questions or whatever. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything that I left out, but I think I pretty much went through the puffers, the swordfish, the
Things like crustaceans and octopus.
yeah, I don't eat that, but that's because I don't like the taste of it. I haven't heard of any issues with it. That doesn't mean they don't exist. Octopus. I just don't like the taste, so I kind of stay away from it. But I haven't heard of any issues. Yes. I eat that stuff like there's no tomorrow. Yeah, I have no problem with that. I've never gotten sick from it, but then again, I haven't heard of any issues from it. Again, you could always have a contamination issue that has nothing to do with dinoflagellates or filter feeders or anything like that. That could always occur, so keep that in mind when you're choosing the restaurants you eat in. But yeah, I've never had a problem with any of that. And like I told that father, you know, when he said, "Do you eat seafood?" I say, "I eat all the time." I'm careful about what I eat. I try. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Remember I told you that book that says that you should avoid eating this and avoid that? There is one thing they tell you: never eat under any circumstances. They don't even tell you not to eat puffer under any circumstances. I guess they don't want to offend people who consider it a delicacy. The one they say don't eat under is moray eels. Okay, and here's why. Two reasons you should never eat a moray eel. Number one, they're predatory reef fish, so they could have ciguatera poisoning. But they also have their own toxin called gymnothorax poisoning. Okay, so you have two possibilities with a moray eel of having a problem. You have ciguatera and gymnothorax. So that's the only one I call in the book where they said do not eat this fish under any circumstances. I would definitely avoid that one. All right, well, thank you all, and I'll stick around and answer more questions if you like.
Mahi, isn't that dolphin?
Yes.
Oh, you never mentioned that.
Well, because there was, you want to give me the mic back for a second? Somebody asked me, what about Mahi, isn't that dolphin? Yes, Mahi is dolphin. Don't get me started on common names, okay? So just so you know, and I'm not a guy, as you can tell, except for that last one, gymnothorax poisoning, I'm not a guy that uses a lot of marine biologists drop every scientific name they know. I've never been a fan of that. But common names, you know, puma, cougar, mountain lion, panther, they're all the same animal, okay? You think it's bad now? Imagine when I first started teaching marine biology and people would go into seafood restaurants and see dolphin on the menu. And they'd say, dolphin? They're serving flipper? And I said, no, they're serving the fish dolphin. And then they see how it's spelled the same way. And so they go, but you are serving flipper. No, they're serving the fish dolphin. That's why a lot of non-Hawaiian seafood restaurants use the Hawaiian name Mahi, okay? That's a Hawaiian name, and they use that because they don't want people to think they're eating flipper. So yes, they are the same thing.
How about salmon?
What about salmon? Perfectly safe to eat, perfectly safe. I just don't like the taste of it. So I just don't like the taste of it. Let me go talk to that later. Yeah. It's a big tuna. It's a big tuna. It's a big tuna. Not as big as I believe the bluefin tunas are. I just wouldn't eat too much of it. It's a big tuna. I don't, you know. I mean, swordfish, I tell swordfish lovers, keep it to once a week.
That's a good thing here. They don't sell it as much as they do in other places. You don't see it on the menu as often, but I love swordfish.
How about crab?
Yeah, I would just eat it like once a week. I think crabs are fine. I eat crab all the time.
Oh, okay. Lobster, shrimp.
I eat lobster, shrimp. I love lobster.
They're bottom feeders. So
Well, but they're
there's
not filter
toxins on the
feeders.
bottom.
They're scavengers.
What's a filter?
A filter feeder, like imagine an oyster. They open up their shell and the water comes through the oyster and they filter out stuff. They filter out plankton, which is what they want to eat, plankton, but they also filter out dinoflagellates. Those are single-cell creatures that can produce toxins.
What about the ones at the bottom? They have to filter what they
No,
eat.
they're not filtering. They're feeding on whatever's on the bottom. They're not filtering anything out.
What if they get one of those poisonous things that are on the bottom?
Those are pretty much planktonic. Those dinoflagellates are in the
so
water
it's
column.
plankton.
Yeah, they're part of the plankton, right?
Barracuda, the same thing as barramundi. Barracuda and barramundi.
I'm not familiar with the common name barramundi. I've heard it before, but I'm not really familiar with
But
it.
it's not barracuda. It's not the same.
Barracuda is barracuda, but there's different kinds of barracuda.
Barramundi is not.
I think that's an Australian fish, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not sure.
But is it good or bad?
I don't know. I've never heard of anybody eating it. No. But barracuda, I would avoid barracuda like the plague.
Just quickly, I just wanted to let you guys know, in case you're curious, if you're in a Japanese restaurant and you see fugu on the menu, that is pufferfish. So just keep an eye out for that. The interesting thing about pufferfish is that it's very well known. I mean, aside from the fact that it's poisonous, and the chefs have to be specifically certified to to cut the meat and everything, so that they don't get like the poison sacs in there and poison the entire thing. The toxin is still in their tissues, just at a lower concentration. And so even if you have a certified chef that does everything very, very carefully, most people will still at least get a very bad stomach ache after eating it. But it's a delicacy, and they'll still do it.
I forgot to mention something else also. This lady here is it's called Divers Paradise, right? I always get the name wrong. Here on Key Biscayne. And they've asked me to teach an adult education marine biology class. So we're going to start next month, once a week for 1 hour. Divers Paradise, right here on the Key. We'll be doing a marine biology, adult education marine biology. No tests, no taking attendance, okay? You can come late if you have to, but I forgot to mention it. Because I've had a few people ask me some questions that jarred my memory, I forgot to mention, how do you know what you're getting when you order a fish in a seafood restaurant? Let's say you decide after today, I'm going to stay away from swordfish, right? How do you know if it's not swordfish, right? That's a problem. The university I used to work at, I was a professor for 26 years, and that university decided to send grad students out to restaurants and take samples of the fish and see if they were being served what they said they were being served. The good news is most restaurants were serving what they said they were. But there were cases where they said it was flounder and it was tilapia, or they said it was grouper and it was something else, and in one case we couldn't figure out what it was. So we weren't sure what the fish was that they ate. But, so you may not get what you order. The good news is most of the time you do get what you order. You are getting the fish you think you're getting. And of course, if you're catching your own fish, you don't have that problem. But that is a problem, and I just read recently there was a Tampa news station went out and did a survey of restaurants, and their percentage of restaurants that were serving what they said it was very low. Most of them were not. Okay, so you got to be careful with that. Now, one of the restaurant owners, the excuse was, well, look, and he showed the bag where the frozen fish came in, right? And it was checked grouper, right? That's a great reason to use scientific names, because what they call grouper, what they call grouper in Australia is a whole different name. So if you use common names, if you just stick to like the 5 major fish that people eat, and you use their scientific name, there would be no confusion. So I did forget to mention that. I wanted to.
Seafood tracking is also a huge problem. It's really difficult to track where seafood is coming from, and as he said, what it is, especially when you have seafood being imported from other countries. And you don't know, they might say it's wild caught, but it's actually from an aquaculture farm. It's a lot of times you get, you are supposed to get one type of like wild caught salmon as opposed to farm salmon. They'll dye it, like farm salmon doesn't have the bright pink color that wild caught salmon does, and sometimes they'll dye it to make it look more pink. And it's still salmon, but it's not the type that you're actually paying for. Wild-caught salmon has a higher price. So tracking seafood is something that a lot of different agencies are working on. It's a really, really difficult problem to solve.